Welcome to EDTalks. And I'm really excited today to have a friend of mine as our guest. His name is Steve Wardell.
Wardell Advisors, yep.
And Steve is really great in terms of the whole segment of digital health and really the insider perspective on investors. So we know a lot about investors. Many of us who are watching have worked with investors, listened to them, and VC and PE firms and Wall Street and all that kind of stuff. But now we're sort of getting that insider's perspective. So it'd be kind of unique and kind of fun. So Steve, I think the first time we met, you were on Wall Street, I think maybe with Leerlink Advisors, and I was a guest. I think I spoke maybe about early on, maybe it was innovation or digital transformation. I don't remember, but I remember we connected then. And so since that time, we sort of followed each other, and you went off and have done your own company, as we'll talk about. So it's great, and I think I may have chatted for your company before. So it's great to have you as part of EDTalks. So welcome to EDTalks.
Yeah, thank you so much. So Leerink hired me out of the digital health industry to be the first ever sell-side analyst focused exclusively on digital health. And that was a wonderful experience. And on Wall Street, we were obsessed with what's going on in the minds of hospital CIOs. So that's how I came to hear about you. So
yeah, it's definitely a small world. And so I thought it'd be really interesting for our audience because it's interesting to me, and really learning more about how that whole side of the industry works, because it's such an important part of the ecosystem. As sort of buyers, as CxOs on the hospital side and payer side, as buyers, we don't really see what goes on behind the scenes. And so hopefully we'll unpack some of that and it'll make us better buyers and maybe better partners, because every part of this is so valuable in the overall, sort of value chain of digital health. And so that's why it's really really important to have this perspective. So tell us a little bit about your firm now. So tell us 2 or 3 things about what Wardell Advisors does.
Sure. So there's about 1,500 digital health software companies started since 2009. And I work with young companies, often companies that are pre-seed, pre-A, pre-B, pre-C. And I help them with growth issues. So that's typically with a sales or business development or sales channel partnership issue, and then also with fundraising as well. So, and there's been a lot going on in fundraising. I think there was probably over investment in digital health, and a lot of venture funds that were adjacent moving into digital health. And now we're seeing the opposite phenomenon, which is investors holding back from investing in digital health due to uncertainty. So it's a tricky road to navigate, but I help these young company leaders, many of whom are founder CEOs who came up the software technical product pathway with issues around growth and fundraising.
Yeah, no, that's great. I could see what value you would bring to them as they're trying to navigate things. Because one, it's super confusing. 2, it's really hard, right? I can't compare it to other industries myself because I don't have that experience in other industries. But I know that both being on the vendor perspective and the buyer perspective, that the sales cycle is super long. And if you don't have the ability to stay in it for the long game, it's really a struggle.
Yeah. So, we all know people who have gone into B2C or B2B, and digital health it's similar to B2B, except it's very highly regulated. But people who see all sides of this will say, with digital health, which is software and tech companies selling into the big enterprise budgets of healthcare, such as the payer budget and the provider budget for software, things take twice as long. They take twice as long because you have to solve a technical problem, and you have to hire expensive technical people, and you have to solve a healthcare problem. You have to hire expensive healthcare people, and then the sales cycle. In B2B, if you were to sell like office productivity software into the Fortune 500, a 12-month sales cycle would be considered to be a long sales cycle. And if you're selling into a hospital, maybe an 18-month sales cycle is a short sales cycle. And then in general, investors they want to fund for about 2 years before there's a big checkup and they check in on the young earnings negative company that needs to continue to raise money. And then 2 years have gone by. What have you done? Well, we've teed up, but we haven't sold these hospitals because the sales cycle is so long, and there are VCs who are asking the open-ended question of, will the venture model be successful in digital health? There certainly has been an enormous amount of startups and venture investment, but we're still seeing, the payoff. There hasn't been an Apple or a Google or or an Uber or in digital health. We're still waiting to see if digital health pays off to investors the way other sectors do.
Right. Do you think, Steve, part of that is because there's so many entrants and they're all fighting for, there's a fixed pie, if you will. And instead of having, 3 or 4 sort of companies that are going after that pie and all able to be successful, is there an issue that there's like 100 going after the same pie? So even though it's a great product and maybe you did sell into 2 or 3 health systems or 10 health systems, that pie is limited now because there's a bunch of other companies like yours that have also sold into 3, 4, maybe 10 health systems. And so no one can build enough scale to be successful. Is that a problem at all?
It's a huge problem. You've nailed it. And to describe it in a little more depth. So first of all, I think a lot of entrepreneurial people will date their interest in our sector to meaningful use, to the $40 billion government subsidy of meaningful use, which was focused on the health system sector. But people, if you talk to, you'll find some entrepreneurs, they got in after meaningful use. And they said it was like a starting gun that welcomed the entrepreneurial community into digital health. Now, of course, the sector was around before then. It keeps having different names. It's being called e-health or health IT or digital health or whatever. Hallie Tecco of Rock Health I give her positive credit for having made the universal term, the super category term, be digital health. I like that term for a number of reasons. But so you have had massive entry of people, and everybody is touched by healthcare. So you have an entrepreneur who might have done a prior company in credit markets in developing countries or something, and then their next company is in digital health, and because they were touched by healthcare in some way, they have something to add. But that has created, especially since 2009, the Fed has had this zero interest rate policy, ZIRP, and that made it very easy. Digital health is doubly privileged. So ZIRP led to major investors around the world wanting one thing more than anything else: growth. They couldn't get fixed income. They couldn't get anything for bonds. So they wanted to invest in growth. It's only 2 growth sectors on earth: technology and healthcare. And digital health is at the intersection of technology and healthcare. So it's doubly privileged to get that money. You had entrepreneurs moving in, money moving in. And it created an environment that was a bit like the dot-com bubble of 1999, where, to pick a very colorful example that was not fun for the people involved, you had like 9 well-funded online pet food companies in 1999. And then you look who made it, and the answer is nobody made it. Amazon made it at the end. And so you do have a situation today where there's been a lot of entry, a lot of funding, and it's been very easy for several years for companies to simply they might have had a couple pivots. They might have had a couple attempts to get customers that haven't gone so well, some pilots that are not turning into rapidly scaling, profitable customers. And in the past, that would have shut down. But for the last several years, they could always get another round of funding. Right. And now you can't. Now we no longer have a zero interest rate policy. We had the Fed raised rates the fastest it's ever raised rates to about 5.25 points for the risk-free rate, 10% on corporate bonds. And so that that easy funding is drying up.
Yeah, that certainly provides a big conundrum. And so do you think it'll slow down then? I mean, logically, the amount of sort of entrepreneurial digital health companies, the volume of those will slow down as a result of what you just shared?
Yeah. I think so. Yes. So right now, what we're seeing is there's among investors, and here we're talking mostly about venture investors. There's shock right now. There's shock and uncertainty. So to give you an idea, the IPO window is closed, and in rounds for companies raising money for rounds C, D, crossover, and IPO, the amount of funding that's getting done, the number of deals is down 95 to 100%.
Wow.
For rounds A and B, now we're talking about more young, innovative companies here. It's down about 75%. This is down as compared to the great boom of 2020 to 2021. Okay. And then when it comes to seed, we're seeing it's down maybe 25%, not so much. And that's probably because seed investors tend to be different people, different pools of capital, different timelines, like 7 years is not a long time for seed investors. Small amounts of money being spent, not thinking about sales in the very near term or going public in the near term. And also at the seed level, there's a sudden strong interest in generative AI. So some of that, the fact that it's not down that much compared to a boom, only down 25% compared to a boom. Some of that is a lot of froth and interest right now in a new wave of generative AI startups. So right there, you've got many of these companies that have been started over the last several years are earnings negative. They have a plan to get to be earnings positive, but if they're earnings negative, it means they need that funding. If they can't get that funding, then things are stopping. So they're going to belt tighten. They're going to lay off people. They have 6 projects. They're going to cut that down to 1 project, the one project that is closest to being cash flow break even. And so right there, you have the slowing down of innovation, of new companies, new vendors coming to the big budgets of healthcare, the payers and the providers with innovations. So an example is that during the golden time, the ZIRP time, the zero interest rate policy time, someone would have an idea. Let's raise $50 million and let's go build a fabulous piece of software that really just innovatively solves a total problem. And then when we're done building it, then we'll think about how we sell it to payers and providers. And that's not going to get financed today. Today, it's going to be build a little product and then see if it gets traction. And that means that if you ever wind up building the grand deluxe piece of software, it's way down the road. It's not 2 years from now. And so to the extent that CxOs at payers and providers have been delighted by all the attention, by the software that solves painful, annoying problems for them, that kind of deluxe treatment is going to be a lot tougher for companies. It's going to be more of a base by base slog with few people trying to raise a giant amount of money and spend it to try to hit a home run down the road without having proved it through small steps along the way.
Yeah, no, that's super insightful. So it makes me think, as a CxO, and I've always been a proponent of, hey, let's work with early stage companies, work with entrepreneurial companies, new kind of a mind shift, new ways of thinking, new technologies. That's how we could really accelerate digital transformation in our health systems. And what should a CxO look for? Like, you obviously know, because it's the insider, like, what's a healthy company and what isn't. You can ascertain that pretty quickly. But as a buyer, are there maybe 1 or 2 things I should ask about or look for? So I see, the scenario would be, I see a great product. Oh, this is great. This is going to solve, my revenue cycle, cash collection problem. But I'm scared. I mean, are there 1 or 2 sort of practical things I should be thinking about or asking about?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. And I tend to take the side of the innovation economy, the innovators, the young companies, the investors who back them. But there's an interesting difference that's emerging now, which is, so if you cycle back now to call it the mid to early 2000s, this is before the zero interest rate policy. In that time, a CxO might be buying from a giant vendor. Who's a giant vendor? Cerner, Philips, versus some up and coming company. At one point, athenahealth was an up and coming company with a radically uncertain, dangerous technology called cloud and SaaS. And in the minds of buyers, there was a really big difference between, say, a young Athena versus a mature Cerner or Philips, which was that Cerner and Philips presumably had very solid finances backing them up. They had a really big, solid balance sheet, and so they could do things like maybe an implementation is tougher than expected, and so a Cerner and a Philips could be expected to put more resources behind it easily. Not a big decision for them to do that. Whereas a young Athena might have been venture backed, might have been earnings negative initially, and has a limited amount of venture funding, and so they definitely have to try harder. But just you couldn't count on them being able to do this. So that was mid to early 2000s. Then you have zero interest rate policy comes along. What was under the surface here is now all of a sudden a high potential team, regardless of the company behind them, regardless of their past, they can just raise a lot of money. So now your entrant is on an equal footing to your legacy incumbent big vendor. So a company started after the dawn of zero interest rate policy, which was around 2009 or so. It could be 1 year old, but it had the resources of a big company, and so that was very valuable for those vendors to be able to know they had that, and to be able to tell buyers they had that from 2009 through 2022 or so. And now it's going back to the old days, and this is not good. Maybe it's realistic. Maybe this is the way the world's always been and always will be. And we had this brief kind of period of zero interest rates, not unlikely to be repeated, that was so beneficial to young companies. But now, once again, you're in a world where the young innovator has a small balance sheet, and the legacy incumbent has a big balance sheet, and so you're back to that, and few people are going to tell you that. The sales rep from the big vendor will tell you that, but most people won't tell you that. The sales vendor the sales rep from the small vendor will definitely not tell you that. So that's one thing to look for, and then we were in a period when there's the engine of great funding was cut off only about 6 quarters ago, and so we're seeing and there's been a sort of a slow realization. It didn't all hit at once, and so if I were a buyer, I have this wonderful selection of options to choose from, but it's not going to be as rich and full and fast in the future as it was in the past, probably because those young vendors got so much funding so easily in the recent past, and that's tightening up and unlikely to return to the way it was from 2009 to 2022 again. So I would be looking for what are my top 5 priorities? Is this a really significant step up in performance for my top 5 priorities? So there's like a rule at MIT that it ought to be 4 times as good as incumbent products for it to be worth taking a risk switching to that, because those incumbent products, maybe you're going to get the full benefit 2 years from now because it requires an implementation or whatever. Those incumbent products are going to be improving 30, 50%, whatever during that time. And so when you purchase, it better be, and so 4 is meant to be, this is a high hurdle to to switch from premises to cloud or some other big technological leap that you're taking here. It better be that much better. And then I would also look for outstanding lighthouse reference customers, where you can call the CIO, the purchaser at that customer. Maybe you know them or respect them or look up to them, and they can walk you through the real value proposition, the pros and the cons for the product. So when thinking about that, and then also be aware that if it's a really young company, it's probably earnings negative, and it probably has a limited amount of venture funding. It's going to be hard for it to get more venture funding, so that you could seek to have a frank, private companies, their financials are private. They don't share them in general, and you can seek to have a frank conversation with them about that. And if they have an outstanding mainstream digital health venture fund as the lead investor of their last round. So what am I talking about? There's many of them, but they have names like Sevenwire or Orbimed or Oak or Flare or Venrock or others. So those firms are not going anywhere. And so if the last round was a $40 million round with the lead investor was Oak, and then they're probably going to get another round of funding, and Oak will help them. Whereas if they're one thing, I have my own podcast. I had a guest on, and he mentioned, he was from Andreessen Horowitz, which is a serious digital health venture fund, and he mentioned that Andreessen Horowitz's pace of investing is roughly the same at a time when everyone is saying that the pace of venture investing is going down. So what's going on here? And his answer was, the tourist venture funds are stopping investing in digital health, whereas the long-term committed venture funds are going on at the same pace. Now, Andreessen Horowitz may be exceptional in the sense that I think even the mainstream funds have cut back a little bit, but they're saying that their pace has been about the same in the sector. So, that kind of backing is great backing for a digital health company. Yeah. And you can actually, they love these young digital health software vendors. They love their big customers. They would do a lot for them. If you said, I want to hear how much runway do you have, and what's your financing plan, they would probably go to the level of talking to you about that. Those are some things to look for.
Yeah, no, this is really rich. I loved all of them. What surprised me, and it makes sense to me, but I'm going to tell you the reality where I've been, the MIT suggestion on 4X. So I was always a big believer in having a high hurdle rate as well. And I was successful, through our governance processes at some health systems where I served. If I got to 2X, I did pretty good. It was hard for people because they want to change out. If it's even, like if there's no improvement, they just want to change out, or a fractional improvement. They want to go through that whole heavy lift and shift. And so where we got 2X, I was always proud of myself, but 4X, that's pretty big. But I can understand why, because like you're saying, if you only look at it as a snapshot in time, I always call them beauty contests. Of course, they're going to look better than this company. But as this company is iterating, so is this company. And, you have to think long-term and what the real costs are of change out and stuff like that. No, this is really good. And I'm like you, Steve. I have a heavy bias towards working with startups, working with smaller, innovative companies, making those investments, taking those risks, because I think it's the only way to super accelerate. Because we saw it for 20, 30 years. There wasn't much acceleration, right, in innovation and transformation. But it was these younger companies that came in and sort of pushed things along. And so I'm always appreciative of that, having a nice blend, Hey, let's do a speed round, because just for the sake of time, let's do what's hot, what's not. And we'll go back and forth, but we'll just do it speedy. And so let's start with what's hot. So Steve, give me your take on it. Are there one or two sectors that are sort of hot right now for?
Yeah, So this is one of my favorite things to do. I'm actually going to frame it in a certain way, which I'm going to frame it from the perspective of the entrepreneur and the young software company looking at budgets. Who feels rich and spendy in terms of big enterprise buyers, and who feels poor and and is pleading poverty in terms of buyers. So when you look at hospitals, the clinical side tech budgets are all feeling very poor right now. They have heavily committed to their enterprise EMR plays. They have little extra cash to play with. A disastrous area is telehealth enablement, that was really hot in 2020 and 2021, and now hospitals are actually getting people back into the hospital, and they're not spending extra on telehealth enablement. But slightly different, there's hospital at home. That is a hot area in that area, and that has to do with RPM. That's not about tying your video calls into your EMR. That is telehealth enablement, but hospital at home is more about RPM codes and RPM services, and that is hot right now. So then there's revenue cycle management. So on the financial side of hospitals, there's revenue cycle management. That's an area that's been underinvested in for 20 years and has a real financial return in it. So this is also, for my bet, revenue cycle management is the single most boring part of all of health tech. So it finally wins that award, and entrepreneurs don't like going into it, but that means that those who do face a more favorable scheme, they have fewer competitors because it's a tough area to go into. But I think robotic process automation in revenue cycle management, and certain patient pay things in revenue cycle management, and just general collecting better in revenue cycle management, that is getting funding from hospitals. So that's the hospital area. Then there's the employer tech area. So this is like Livongo or Accolade selling into the employer budget. This budget is strong. Employers like these companies. They're doing what they need to do for employers. Employers want to spend more on care management. Care management is solutions for the employer and the employee in areas like diabetes management, other metabolic and pre-diabetes, hypertension, musculoskeletal, mental health, cancer management, maybe autoimmune, with the incredibly expensive drugs for autoimmune that are out there, and managing that condition a little better, that sort of thing. So this is employers bypassing the plain old healthcare system to give tools to employees to sort of bend medical trend down. So more chronic care there, that's good. The trouble with this, from the entrepreneurial perspective, the trouble with this perspective is it's maturing, it's consolidating. The strength is going into like the vendors who have good sales forces are edging out the vendors who have great new point solutions but don't have good sales forces. And it's getting harder and harder to reach that benefit leader there who has the budget there. And that benefit leader, like in hospitals, that benefit leader is moving towards an enterprise buy. They want to buy a suite, not a point solution. They want to buy multiple products across different subsectors. And that makes it harder for the innovator with the new solution with a slightly better, diabetes data to break in and displace Livongo or Omada or something like that. So then there's pharma tech. Pharma tech is incredibly hot right now. So pharma is feeling rich, and pharma likes outsourcing to tech vendors. And so instead of in the old days, 20 years ago, pharma was doing ridiculous things like getting Oracle licenses and then hiring dozens of programmers to build their own CRM solution just for Merck inside of Merck. They were empire building. There were vast empires under the CIO of Merck, and he couldn't wait to hire more of his own people to just duplicate what other pharma companies were doing for their own proprietary stuff. And it wasn't very good software. But now pharma is outsourcing. They like outsourcing. And so there's two main budgets of pharma tech. There's the commercial budget. That's like buying Veeva for CRMs. That's really hot right now. What they're trying to do is kind of naughty. They're trying to figure out how to reach the physician through EMRs and through tech and that sort of thing. So physicians are getting better and better, and hospitals are getting better and better at shutting out pharma. And pharma feels very upset and very dejected about this, and because they thought they were best buddies with physicians and hospitals and that sort of thing. And so pharma is desperately trying to figure out how to fund an EMR to get their clinical decision support that tells their story or their ads into the doctor and into the patient. That's on the commercial side. It's also the clinical side of pharma. And there, pharma historically was very, very conservative about clinical trial management, but they are accepting about software automation of clinical trials, like Medidata for clinical trial automation. But now that's been blown open by COVID, and now we're seeing pharma do all sorts of innovative things in clinical trial decentralization. So software that supports clinical trial decentralization, they've ended some of that conservatism they had about accepting novel solutions and software in that area. So then payer tech. So in payer tech, payers are interested in programmatic benefits like the Livongos and Omadas. They sell to both employers and also to payers. There's interesting stuff in AI having to do with auditing how claims are billed for claims integrity, and also just spotting excessive upcoding or claims integrity. So there's actually going to be an AI arms race between the hospitals and the payers. The hospitals are going to try to use AI for clinical note taking, which then all goes into the EMR and is done better than before. In turn, they're going to use that for proper billing.
Right.
And then on the other end, so there's going to be AI that's coding and billing at the hospital, and at the other end there's going to be AI reading it and scratching its head and wondering if it can challenge it or whatever. But there's going to be a massive. This is so healthcare, by the way. It's going to be a massive AI arms race between the billers and the bill payers using the latest generative AI tools. And then there's a lot of attention with payers around improving Medicare Advantage plans and boosting HEDIS star scores. And there's some interesting tech solutions that legitimately help and improve plan quality and help plans do that. So that's my sort of around the world of budget strength and what's hot.
Yeah, Steve, my mind, you're just blowing up my mind here. It's just we could talk about this for hours. This is so super insightful. I know my audience is getting as much out of this as I am. This is incredible because we have so much more to talk about. But we'll have to have you back. Let me ask just one last question as we wrap up, because I thought I would really interested to get your perspective on this. Who is the buyer today on the provider payer side? So traditionally, it's been the CIO, maybe up until, I don't want to show my bias, but maybe up until 2010. Who is it today? Is it still the CIO, or are there other people that are becoming the primary buyers?
So I'll focus on the provider system here. And one of the interesting technological revolutions that's happened in B2B, and things always hit healthcare. They start in B2B and they hit healthcare 10 years later. And people in healthcare are saying, are we really going to have SaaS in healthcare? I wonder if we're going to have SaaS in healthcare. And the answer is yes, you are, because it was successful in B2B. And it's going to hit 10 years later or whatever. It's already hit. But there's actually been a strategy of making software that is so easy to use, doesn't require training, very easy to use, very easy to build, very easy to scale. And SaaS is great for this as opposed to on-premises stand-up stuff, where it's a trivial matter for a department head in a hospital to just tell his department to use this or something. Right. It's within their, maybe it is $60 per seat. That's probably within their budget. They don't have to go to the CIO for that. And so, it is. Imagine you're a sales rep for a tech vendor, and you're approaching a health system. It is as crazy and awful as ever to identify all the people who might be involved in the decision. Okay, CFO obviously is involved as a blocker. Yes. Right. CIO might be a champion or whatever. If only you had something that was 30 seats, $30 per seat per month that a department head could make a decision about or whatever. And so that is coming out of B2B. That's real. That exists. And for that, you might have, it might be seemingly low cost for a hospital department decision makes it just for their department. You could imagine a group communication tool, texting like a HIPAA compliant texting like group communication tool that the emergency department thinks is incredibly important for them because they have people all over, including off the premises who are bringing patients in or whatever. They can all be together on this, and then they don't need to get capital budget approval. They don't need to get any budget approval from the CIO or other party. So that, but also there's stuff that might be a big software purchase, but it is so important to the career of a radiology department head, let's say, that they absolutely insist on making it, and they want it to be their budget, and they're going to fight for it and make it work or whatever. And this is much more common today than it was back 15, 20 years ago when the CIO, had the role authority credit budget to be deciding these things for the whole enterprise. And partly it's a technological revolution of this decentralization of making a smaller piece of software that's easier to sell. And that there's no ramp up, which is to say that there's one instance of this software on servers in California, and when you add 6 seats onto it, it does it instantly, and it's trivial, and you don't have to train anyone in it because everyone, it's so easy to use or whatever, that it's not a big deal internally at the hospital. So I would say that it's still so there's no one's replaced the CIO. No single person has replaced the CIO. On RCM, by the way, revenue cycle management, it's the CFO, and that's more important. Budget has shifted away from EMR spend toward revenue cycle management spend, which has a real financial return. So maybe it's the CF. Maybe there's a cage match here. CFO enters, CIO enters, one man leaves, or something. But there's a CFO, but there's also these minor actors, head of emergency department, head of radiology or whatever, who can make these decisions for other things. So.
Yeah, no, that's very insightful, and that is very true. Every place that I had the privilege to serve, really wrestled with that. I'd always have vendors say, "Oh, we're live in your organization." I'm like, "Really? Wow, I didn't know that." Because of all the reasons you cited. So it's more about going after developing enterprise-wide principles and safety mechanisms, because that's going to happen. And so I think, the old days of command and control are out, and there's different ways of handling it. But that's another program. No, Steve, this has been super insightful. I think a lot of people are going to be like, how do I find out more about the Steve guy? So Steve, how would they look you up for more information?
That's great. So, feel free to reach out to me by email, Stephen@WardellAdvisorsLLC.com. I'm also active on Twitter, Stephen Wardell. I'm on LinkedIn, Stephen Wardell, and I have a weekly podcast called Digital Health Investor Talk. I bring on guests. We talk about what's going on in the world of payers, providers, pharma, innovators, investors, that sort of thing. And that's called Digital Health Investor Talk. You can also look up under my name, Stephen Wardell, and that's on Apple, Google, and Spotify podcast networks.
Yeah, and I listen to your stuff, and I'm following on Twitter, and I can vouch for everything Steve. So definitely encourage the audience, if things that Steve shared grab your attention like they do mine, definitely connect with them. Steve, thanks so much. I've really enjoyed our friendship over the years, and I've learned so much from you. And again, today is no exception. Thanks so much for being my guest.
Sure thing. It's great to connect this way. All
right, so that wraps up another edition of EDTalks. This one was a little bit longer, but man, the content was so rich. I just didn't want to stop. So look us up for our next drop coming soon.